It's one of the two or three oldest writings in the whole Bible, so it really is the most bloodthirsty book of the lot, because some of the primitive stuff has really survived very well.
It's true, again, that the book of Judges to modern readers is a very gruesome book. In many ways, it does reflect the reality of ancient life, the reality of ancient warfare.
Moses and Joshua were considered judges of Israel. They led the people. They weren't kings, but people would come to them with their problems, with court decisions and things like that. So they're established as leaders, but not as a king necessarily. And so Judges is a book about these other people who lead after Joshua.
That's the period between the figure of Joshua and the first king, who was King Saul. So there was an interim period when the leaders of Israel were called judges.
They're certainly not judges in the ordinary sense of kind of sitting in courts, arbitrating in legal disputes and so on. The term really has more this sense of someone who acts as a deliverer figure.
Let's see, some of the famous judges that we have would include, well, Samson is the main story that people will have heard of, but there's also a female judge named Deborah that's also famous. And then Gideon will be another that people may have heard of.
So the big story is a cycle of 5 events, and this goes on happening throughout the book about 5 or 6 times. And that is Israel disobeys God and gets itself into trouble with idolatry and so on. Act 1. Act 2, they cry to the Lord in their distress. Act 3, he raises up a judge to deliver them. Act 4, the judge delivers them from their oppressors. Act 5, they have a time of prosperity and peace until it starts all over again with Act 1. Well, then within your big story, you have about 7 little stories, and that is about the individual judges. And there's something rather special about them. They've all got a defect. Well, perhaps not Gideon, but all the others. The first judge we hear about with a defect is a man called Ehud, who simply, it says he's left-handed. But in those days, to be left-handed was not like today. It was a serious defect. So the people were meant to be amazed that God should use someone who was left-handed. The second one, in those days, I hasten to say, was even more problematic. We have 2 women, which is Jael and Deborah, and they lead Israel against the Philistines. In fact, the story gets quite bloody because Jael gets hold of the Philistine commander. She really seduces him, and when he's asleep in her lap, she hammers a tent peg through his head.
Samson is probably one of the most famous characters. He actually has the largest section in the book of Judges. He's supposed to be a Nazirite, which means that he won't drink any wine, he won't cut his hair. Now Samson is a man that says frequently the Spirit of God comes upon him, and he's supposed to be immensely strong. So imagine something like an Arnold Schwarzenegger with really long hair who sort of breaks the mold of the judge, because he's not really, he's a pretty selfish guy, really.
A very odd kind of figure, not a pious, God-fearing figure in many kind of ways, really a rather wild, in many ways a kind of bawdy figure.
He does things for his own good. It doesn't seem to be necessarily caring about the people so much, but it ends up benefiting the people, because they're in conflict with this group of people called the Philistines, who are on the coast of Israel.
Now the Philistines were a people who settled in Canaan, in the land of Palestine, in the southwest corner of Palestine, in what's now the Gaza Strip. Gaza was one of the ancient Philistine cities, and the Samson story is very much set on the kind of border land between the Philistine territory and the tribe of the southern tribes.
So we have stories of Samson confronting the Philistines, and in one case killing hundreds of them with the donkey's jawbone that he finds in the ground.
Samson's role in the stories is really to Well, to make fun of the Philistines in many ways, all kinds of humour in the stories about him, all kinds of strange incidents taking place.
Another time we have a story of him being so furious at the Philistines that he takes two foxes and ties torches to their tails and then lets them run through the grain fields, and so it destroys all their crops.
His role within the book in theological terms is simply because by his actions against the Philistines he's portrayed as bringing about some kind of relief for Israel from that pressing and imminent threat.
There's another occasion where a lion comes out and he just kills the lion because it was going to attack him, and several days later he walks by and there's a bee's nest inside of the lion, inside the carcass, and so he scoops it out and he's eating the honey, which is that's going to be richly impure. And so as this leader of Israel, he's voluntarily participating in association with a carcass. I mean, most of us today, I mean, if we saw a honeycomb inside of any sort of carcass, we're not going to eat it anyway, but this was especially taboo then.
Samson also had a great weakness because he was a woman's man, and he, of course, was seduced by the famous Delilah.
He meets a Philistine woman named Delilah, who's very beautiful, and she is sort of threatened by her people to figure out why he's so strong, why every time we try and bind him up or whatever, he always breaks free and he always kills us. Like, we would like to avoid this whole him killing us from now on. Delilah is trying to get him to tell his secret of his strength, and so she says, please tell me what makes your strength so great. And how could you be bound so that no one could subdue you? Which is kind of, a warning, like, hey, like, watch out for this lady already. But Samson says, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that are not dried out, then I shall become weak and be like anyone else. And so she does this. Turns out, not true. So she says, the Philistines are upon us, and he breaks the bowstrings, no problem. And she's like, oh, you tricked me. Like, how, and I'm really embarrassed now. And so can you tell me now, like, what is the real secret? And so she binds him with new ropes. That's what he says is the next thing to do. She does that, and she says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He breaks the ropes again, and she's like, you think this is funny. This isn't funny. So he ends up telling her, it's my hair. I've never cut my hair, never put a razor to my head because I'm a Nazirite. And so that night while he's sleeping, she cuts off his hair. And then she says, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He gets up. The Philistines are able to take him easy. They end up taking him to one of their cities. They gouge out his eyes, and they sort of gloat over him and have him grinding at a mill. And then there's this one little comment saying, Samson here with his eyes gouged out, his hair was starting to grow back. And so you're like, oh, something may happen here. And they end up bringing him out. The Philistines, that is, bring him out into sort of the temple or the courtyard area, and they have him just so that they can make fun of him, like, look who we've conquered, Samson, the destroyer of Philistines, now this weak man. And he asks the person who's helped him out, like, please put my hands on the columns so I can stand up. And so they put his hands on the columns, and he says, God, just give me strength this one more time so I can destroy my enemies. And he pushes the columns. The building sort of collapses and it kills all these people, the Philistines and Samson included. And so in the end you have sort of a victory for Israel, but at the same time you're left with, like, Samson still being kind of a selfish guy in the end. It was about him, like, victory over my enemies.
And then in chapters 17 to 21, outside that framework, there's a strange and in some ways rather bizarre and rather gruesome collection of stories, including a very grim tale about rape and murder and revenge that the book finishes with. But interestingly, that section, chapter 17 to 21, it begins with a little phrase, in those days there was no king in Israel, everybody did what was right in his own eyes. And interestingly, the book of Judges and that that section finishes with precisely the same phrase. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. In other words, everybody just followed their own patterns of behavior. There was no kind of central authority. There was nothing to bring the people together.
So we're beginning to look forward to 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings, which are the first books that are about the kings of Israel who follow the judges.
So there's this question about what is the extent of the land of Israel. Now, one biblical definition that we find in Judges 20 verse 1, it talks about all the people of Israel coming out from Dan to Beersheba. And we're here in Dan, where everything is lush and green, and we can see behind us the beginnings of the River Jordan flowing rapidly below us. And then Israel extends all the way down to the south to Beersheba. And so here to Beersheba, where all of a sudden things become a bit dry. Beyond this, to the south, desert.